The optimism really helps those people because when you're talking to them about their problems, you can talk about it in a way that allows them to think a little bit higher than the actual problem. And often there are things they can do in ancillary to the actual issue that will allow them to progress or highlight that this isn't actually a blocker. It's a problem. You need enough to make a better decision, but you'll never be able to make the best decision. You don't want to get, you don't want to be paralyzed by waiting for that last nugget of data.
Welcome back, or welcome to the Product Team Success Podcast. I'm Ross Webb. Now, have you ever wondered what happens when an aeronautical engineer dives headfirst into the world of product management? Well, today's your lucky day, because joining us is John Kennedy, whose flight into the world of engineering has landed him in the existing terrain of product leadership. Now, John brings a really interesting solution-driven engineer's approach to every product challenge, and his unwavering optimism is a testament to his belief that there's always a way forward. We'll also delve deep into the nuances of capturing genuine customer feedback and the transformative power of emotional intelligence in product development. So trust me, this episode is a journey you won't want to miss. Buckle up and let's soar. Hey, John, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm so glad you came. I've really been looking forward to this podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, great, Ross. Thanks very much for having me. It's since we've started talking, it's been a real reflective point for me. There's a lot kind of going on. You kind of take it for granted until someone asks you to talk about it, and then you go, oh, yeah, there's quite a lot here to share. So, yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah,
the podcasts are great like that, aren't they? They kind of force your attention to actually think about, oh, wait, I have done quite a few things in my life. Or wait, I have actually achieved quite a bit, or wherever you want to take. So for the audience that don't know you as well as I have, or as well as I do, please could you just give them a quick kind of potted background about your history? And I've got a view on what I think is pretty unique and pretty awesome about you. But I'd love for the audience just to hear about how you ended up here today.
Yeah, thanks. The journey of a product manager, when I talk to even the people you employ in your teams and other folks you speak to who have become product managers, it's never a straight path, or, especially from historically, the role wasn't as large in terms of its employment as it is now. And not many people were employed as product managers straight out the gate. So a lot of us have come via a roundabout kind of way, and I am no different. My background is actually engineering, and not computer science, software engineering, but kind of hands-on nuts and bolts engineering. I was an aeronautical engineer. I trained in Southampton in aerodynamics, and that's kind of where I got a flavor for computing with computational fluid dynamics. Really enjoyed that part of it, but it really taught me to solve problems in a way that kind of I don't think many degrees do. And so that engineering kind of problem solving, and there's always a way to fix it, and there is always generally a way to fix it, has kind of stuck with me throughout. But I moved very quickly from engineering and aeronautical engineering after spending some time in it. It just moved a bit slowly for me. I was always keen to learn more and move quickly in my career and technology I was touching. And aeronautical engineering, you've got to be really careful. No one's rushing around making mistakes and launching early and failing early when you're designing a plane. That just doesn't really happen. So the startup space and technology really appealed to me. So I got into technical troubleshooting, unsurprisingly. Worked on large telecoms networks. Then I moved into big data before it was called big data at Thomson Reuters, where we were looking after the market, financial market data again. Both those things quite urgent. If your phone line's down or the mobile networks are down, that's urgent. And if the financial markets aren't making money, that's also urgent. So I've kind of come through and got battle hardened in a sense of urgency, in a sense of always being able to fix something, and an optimism around that. So that stood me in good stead. Then moved into cloud era, where I got my flavor for open source technology and got really hands-on with that, and it's still part of my role now. I'm with Ivan. I transitioned into product when cloud era started looking at cloud offerings, and it was an area I was interested in. Very quickly became the go-to person and moved from leading the organizations around technical support into product. And that other aspects that I hold dear alongside troubleshooting and optimism is customer empathy. and you come from the front line of customer support where all you hear is the bad stuff going wrong, you really learn to pick out the bits that really need fixing and the bits that are the most critical. And then now, thankfully, in product, I get to think of that stuff in advance. So hopefully it doesn't arrive broken in people's hands, or the worst cases don't.
Great. So you've seen it, as you said, you've seen the worst side, and you're still optimistic, right?
Yeah, it is. It's an odd. I thought that would knock it out of me, if I was honest. I thought like the years of just dealing with problems and issues, because every customer comes to you with like in a really often in a negative state. But what I also found is that the optimism really helps those people, because when you're talking to them about their problems, you can talk about it in a way that allows them to think a little bit higher than the actual problem. And often there are things they can do in ancillary to the actual issue that will allow them to progress, or highlight that this isn't actually a blocker. It's a problem. There's an issue. We will fix it. But also you can do this. These other bits are here. Actually, the workload just changing slightly will make this work perfectly well. So we should look at those options as well. But you've got to back that up with then fixing it. So therefore, you gain some trust when you come back and you get something fixed and working. But generally, the optimism brings a relationship to a better place quicker. Customers feel reassured that you're going to fix it. If you're optimistic, you're going to fix it. There's no doubt in my mind often when I approach a problem that this will get fixed. We're going to work it out. We'll move forward in whatever regard that is. And that comes across to customers, and it kind of really builds trust really quickly with them.
Yeah, and I'm sure customers I'd love to actually talk about your team, right, that you manage. How do you, I think one of the things we were talking about was like, if you have the right people, they're not going to get bogged down in a problem. And I guess if you've got the right people with the right sense of optimism, they're definitely not going to get bogged down in a problem, right?
Yeah, that's really, it's a really tricky balance in product management, I find, because you want to hire people who are thorough, diligent. You don't necessarily want them caught up in the perfect trap, but you want them to kind of do a really good, thorough job. And if they get too into the weeds on those kind of problems, you want them to be able to lift their heads a bit. And optimism helps with that, because they can come to you often come to you blocked, which a good leader should be there when, again, like a customer, when they're having an issue, your PM should come to you when they're blocked or struggling or having a problem. And I found my optimistic approach is very good at lifting people up for even a short period to get their own perspective, because that's often what they need, is like they can become enthralled in a problem to the point where it breaks their world in a way, and they really struggle, and they come to you in a state of kind of high anxiety at times, and you have to go, okay, talk me through it. Optimistically, this is one of 8 things we're doing. Is this the most important thing? Like, can this wait for a week? Can we have another think about it? Can you give yourself some breathing room? And then also, and that, again, I'm always able to release them from being blocked, because I can highlight that this isn't, yes, it's important, but, it's not the most important thing, or there are many other things we can do here, or there are other options. And it generally allows people to free up and move on. And I think that's critical.
And where do you think a lot of that anxiety comes from? Is it like job anxiety? Do you think they're worried that like you as their manager or their peers or whoever are going to think they're getting it wrong? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what do you think really creates, that state of anxiety?
You're not at all putting words in my mouth, because this is all those things contribute. I think we mitigate in our team a risk. My team are very open at coming to me early with things that are troubling them or bothering them, or, I'm a safe place to vent, which is a tough trust to build. But they see me sharing early and sharing what's going on and being very transparent, and they see me taking that input in and having an alteration of path or direction, and we come out with a better result. And so I kind of live by the mantra, you got to share early, you got to show me what's going on, you got to help. But I think to the point early, like we hire diligent, good people who really want to do a good job. Sometimes they can feel anxious that they haven't solved something themselves, like that they haven't got to the solution. And it's great in a way because I love the passion for solving it, but also I need them to work as a team. And if you share early and get more input, you're more likely to come up with a better solution. And the other, as a leader, and you'll probably get this as well, I don't need to solve. I'm never going to take credit for this. The credit will go to the company for us solving a customer problem. That's the highest order bit for us. My team are often everyone, I celebrate all my team's wins, but you'll rarely see my name on things because it's not about, I want to empower that team to own it. But you've also got to clear that anxiety that just because this is in your domain, in your area, and, you are an expert, you'll have blind spots like any of us, technically, emotionally, which will stop you being able to solve any one specific problem possibly, and sharing it and talking amongst the team and getting input will free you up and get you to the solution. So yeah, I think that's where it comes from, the fear of not being able to solve it themselves.
I always used to tell my teams, and I guess it's become a bit of a cliche, was that, to tell users that, if the users like it, tell them, it's the whole team that did it. If the users don't like it, it's on them as the product manager. At least take responsibility or some ownership for that. And I think people are pretty good at that in product. I think, and this is one of the things I'd like to talk to you about on your teams, or, when you're hiring and building teams. You spoke a little bit about empathy to me, and I'd love to get your thought on that, because it's come up often on the podcast with a lot of product leaders. And just to give you context as well, is a lot of the time, people talk about AI all the time. And one of the things, not to jump on the AI bandwagon, I'm kind of bored of it, but empathy is something that either you can't outsource, you can't. I remember there was a great book by A.J. Jacobs I read a few years ago, when he was talking about how to, outsourcing, and he was talking about at the time outsourcing offshore. So he wanted to offshore his wife being cross with him. So he'd read it to some VA that he hired and say, these are excuses, please get back to his wife and write on his behalf, say, AJ apologizes, but, these are the things. And then he wanted to outsource, reading bedtime stories for his children to someone else to read it to him. So you can't outsource empathy, is what I always talk about. But I'd love to know, how does that impact not just the empathy side, but, the positivity? And because you obviously hire and have hired lots of people, over the course of your career. I'd love to see in your hiring process, how does that impact it?
Yeah, it's a really subtle thing, actually. So I always look when I'm interviewing, I ask people, like, empathy comes to its fore in the worst of times, generally, or emotional intelligence will be best showed when someone's in a tricky situation. So generally in an interview question, I'm more interested in how failures, what went wrong, how it went wrong, to the point you just made, hearing how they owned an issue that went wrong and managed it with their team or other people within the organization is always super important. And always looking for those telltale markers around talking about the customer. Like, if there was a failure, I don't just want to hear it was late, or it had, we were a month late, and so the engineers, it meant marketing was late and we couldn't do this. I want to hear about the customers who are waiting on that feature for production workload, what the impact was on them, and how that was relayed internally to make sure that there was an improvement next time, and how they relay the impact of the customer issues before they're solved, and when there's an issue going wrong. That's what I'm looking for when I'm hiring. And so I'm looking for those emotional kind of key points when they bring them up about how people felt. And it's not often, people don't bring feelings into interviews very often, even when they're talking about customers or their teams. But that's those kind of, when I start hearing that, I'm hearing someone who's picking up on customer pain, engineering issues, friction within teams, and how they respond to negative situations. The one phrase that even very recently, I can be an emotional person. My background, I'm Irish, so I'm a Celt, as it's obvious. Ups and downs, and so I'm a very emotional person, but I wear my kind of heart on my sleeve. And I remember once speaking to a mentor I had, not a mentor, MLF friend, the CEO of Neo4j, was a great person, and he said one thing that stuck to me that I've always said to all my teams ever since, which is, if someone comes and they're really upset or angry, or there's kind of something going on in the team, allow them to kind of get it off their chest, and then remind them that every single one of us gets to choose how you respond to the world. It's like, you can be annoyed that that person's done that. That's a perfectly valid response. We could not be annoyed. That's a perfectly valid response as well. And just lifting people's heads a bit to kind of put it back in their control. So yeah, someone's irritated you with something there. Do you know what? You can respond with an irritated response, or you could not. You could just kind of, yeah, that's up to you. And it really gives the ownership back to them on the emotional front. So to your point about how do I build a team that's kind of emotionally intelligent, I look for the markers in the interviews. I ask about the times where things go wrong. That generally shows you a bit of mettle. And then I like to hear how they get on and how they deal with friction points, and that generally gets you a fairly solid team.
So, John, I'd like to kind of change tack a little bit. And I'd like to talk about, how do you know and how do you get your team to find out what they should be focusing on? As in, like, what is the highest priority for them to solve? I know we spoke about that a little bit. We've kind of hinted on that. We've spoken about hiring and hiring for the right people. We've also got that emotional intelligence. We've spoken about your Celtic background, I guess, a little bit. But I'd love to get some of your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, it's prioritization is really tough, and everyone says that, but when you look at the realities for me, it's down to the people, because an individual PM will invest a lot of time. They're usually employed in an area they're experts in or have a good, deep understanding, and so they suffer as much as they will bemoan a customer saying every feature is important. They're all the number one priority. We've all heard that.
Sure.
From your biggest customers. Often with people who are very have a deep level of knowledge in a specific area, it's tough for them to pick the highest priority thing to do because they see value in all of it. And so it's a very grey, priority becomes a very grey area. What we tend to do in our teams is, to the point earlier about sharing early, we have a group kind of discussion of the biggest. We do normal roadmap planning where you kind of pick out the biggest pieces, but on a day-to-day basis, making sure people are, we're updating ourselves and our team on when something's done. Because that will often, if you ask, if you've got an example, when will this be done? Or when do you think it's done? What's your definition of done? You can highlight when a piece of work's been carried on a little bit too long. Could be finished now, could be out, could be in the customer's hands. Talk to me about those success metrics. When are we going to see some output? But the meetings around, we share what we're doing, when it's likely to be finished, what's the next priority, any late arriving disruptive things that often hit us from side swipes. You've got to work hard to make my team resilient to the very normal environment of PM, which is the CEO coming up with, this is now a new priority for next week. It's like, okay. And how do we cope with that kind of change of prioritization? But the right things at the right time, to the point I made about when is something done, it's very easy with diligent folks who are rolling out a process to enable something to take it too far, because a process isn't a customer outcome. That's the bit I asked the team to highlight. Is like, what's the outcome? Have you delivered on the customer outcome? And they might be, we're halfway there. I'm like, really? Are you halfway there? Can this get out now? Like, could we go early? Can you get that in? Have you shown it to a customer before it's ready? Have they seen the Figma designs? Like, have you got any feedback? And it's really trying to make sure they're focused on the customer outcome and not doing excessive, unnecessary work, because a diligent person will want to finish something to a very high standard. And often, if you focus on the outcome, the customer outcome can be met way earlier. I think many customers will say, actually, I don't want the console, I just need the API. If it works on the API, I'm ready to go now. And that will often free up them you get great user feedback early before you build the console, which then you can then build in a different, more effective way.
Yeah, so early customer feedback is so vital. And as you know, we've spoken before, the podcast is produced in partnership with Amplitude, which is a piece of software that I met the Amplitude team just because I was absolutely in love with their software. And a few years ago when I was working on a product, and I figured everybody should do it. And I know that, Amplitude is a product analytics tool. And a lot of the time we talk about being data-driven or data-led, which kind of drives me crazy a little bit, because I think some people, when I have conversations with them, they're like, either, okay, well, we don't have the data for this, we don't have the data for that. And in my opinion, we don't have the data for let's say probably maybe 30-40% if we're lucky, or we might have 30-40% to influence us. We need to make a decision and move on, and we can't wait till everything aligns and the stars align perfectly and then we can make a decision. We just don't have the luxury of that. But I'd love to get your thoughts, especially with your background from support and engineering, on analytics and being data driven, and just your thoughts on where you and your team are with that in currently.
Yeah, it's super critical, and but it's getting to your point, is bringing the right mix, the right balance of, you need enough to make a better decision, but you'll never be able to make the best decision. You don't want to get you don't want to be paralyzed by waiting for that last nugget of data. Well, if we did this, we'd know if that was true. It's like, well, that will always be the case. So we on previous role in EFJ, built and led the product analytics team that supported the whole PM function. So it was an org inside product management, which I was really proud of. We didn't use Amplitude in that scenario due to previous decisions that we'd already made, but Amplitude is a great bit of software. It came very highly in our evaluation. I definitely will look at them again. But the ability to, so your question, sorry, I'll ramble a bit there.
The question I was trying to make, or the point I was trying to get to, was a lot of us talk about in product about being data-led or data-driven, and yet when it comes to making real decisions, as you said, we're never going to make the perfect decision. We've just got to make the best available decision. What is your experience with your team and leading a team and getting them to be able to get that mindset? How do you help them get there?
Yeah, so it's we've adopted the working backwards process, both at NeoJ and my last role and here at Ivan for product management. So at that very first product discovery stage, we're already getting the folks to decide. Don't assume that all the usage will be there. Like we at Ivan aren't. We collect everything and then we'll go later on and we'll be able to find whatever we need. That's just, it's not, the scale we're working at, it's just not cost effective. We would be bankrupt in no time. So we have to ask the PM to think really carefully up front on the key metrics that they think are going to be of value. And when that doc gets shared around the entire PM org, other people will chip in and we come up with a subset or a small set, 5 to 10 things, some relating to the journey of the user through a flow or their onboarding, others relating to actual just adoption of features or volume of data or queries run, or some key metric that will define that this feature A has been used and had delivered an outcome for the customer. And if we do that at that early point, it then flows into all the engineering design further down, and so the metrics are generally there at the end. Now, does it always mean that you get to the end and you've captured the right one? Not always. Some of those are still, you look at them afterwards and go, that wasn't particularly useful. But you've at least learned that, and the next time around you won't make the same mistake. There is another challenge there with how often do you get them to look at the data. Like, you don't want them heads down in Excel spreadsheets or running queries against whatever tool you're using to find out the customers, because you just don't get, it's not a good use of time. So I generally recommend we do updates every week to each other to report on how our features are doing, and that requires people to go and look at the data. You're looking at the metrics around general customer adoption and growth and expansion, and the other key metrics. We have quite a big PLG motion, but I try and limit it to once a week. You're not allowing your team to bury themselves just looking for that perfect nugget of data, and we keep ourselves fairly honest by sharing early to kind of poke holes in each other's recommendations. Like, we've got a very open and honest culture. So if someone says, I think I'll measure this, it's like, well, what's that going to tell you? And it's like, okay, I thought it would tell me this. And people are like, well, I don't think so. But also you could probably get from X and Y instead of A and B, you'd probably get a fairly useful insight. So looking at it, setting them up front, making sure they have a clear idea of how they're going to measure anything they do with metrics, and then keeping track of that as the things roll out and get released. But then once a week, just having a higher level check-in with the data for their products generally is enough. Any more than that, and I find people can get into the weeds. When you find someone in a 12-tab spreadsheet trying to prove that feature has driven revenue, you're like, probably better use of your time than that.
Yeah. But speaking to customers, right? I mean, by the time you've gone through that, you could have probably spoken to 5 or 10 people maybe, and actually gotten some real actual feedback from what the customers really want. Well, as you mentioned earlier, if they had a Figma, outline, could they show it to people? I remember at a role years and years, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and creating for this company the first client advisory boards. And it was kind of with the developers, I remember it's like we could be talking about it, or I can just invite 15 of a representative side section of customers, spoke to customer success, got them in, spoke to them, asked them what they thought. They told me they all hated it, which I was shocked about. Well, one feature they hated, I was shocked about. Other things they were interested in. The other thing I did there when I started one of those first client advisory boards is we were blessed that we had a videographer full-time on site. So we got him to actually film the client advisory board, edited it down, and then shared it with our developers who are offshore in Macedonia. And we actually got them to actually watch the edit. So it wasn't just like, hey, this is Ross, the product manager or the head of product. He's telling us what we want. It's actually, hey, we sent through the wireframes, the Figma designs, we created the prototypes, and this is the actual feedback from customers talking. And I remember it was really interesting that you could see different developers' feedback, like some who like to have, let's say, like even story points really spoon-fed to them. They'd be like, well, why do I need to watch this? This is out of the sprint. This is like 6 hours of my day because I got to watch it for 3 hours and talk about it for 3 hours. That's like almost losing a day of development. Therefore, I've lost like 8% of my sprint. This is a waste of time. And then I was like, okay, Scrum's revenge. Scrum has messed us up again. Yeah, right. So I really love what you said there. Tell me something, John. What are you, as a product leader, growing your product team, can you give me some examples of, say, maybe 2, 3, maybe 1, it doesn't matter, challenges that you're dealing with? And you don't have to go into examples like I'm trying to have problems hiring people or something. I'm just talking general product leadership problems that you may be, dealing with or going through.
Yeah, that's a great one. There are lots, obviously. Your team is like, depending on who, the different. I think one of our challenges is we're a relatively new org in Ivan, or a rapidly growing org in Ivan in terms of product management. So some of the challenges we're facing are the evolution, as product management has evolved from, essentially what it used to be, which is a project manager for a development team, has gradually evolved into this what we know today as product management. But we are currently in a transition between product owners who sat very close to engineering teams, wrote JIRAs for them, kind of really got into the nitty gritty, sure. Not even reviewing PRs to some extent, which is not. And so we're migrating people in their roles to product managers that kind of sit with the more business focused, customer focused roles. And so one of the challenges we're facing is, and I think we're beginning to achieve it with the working backwards process, is lifting people away from what the engineers are doing to what the customers are wanting to do. And one of the a point you raised there, which is exactly what we're doing, is gathering feedback from the engineering as the PMs change their behavior, and they're bringing more and more customer focus into the engineering teams. And it's getting a great response. I've never heard such glowing feedback about, our PMs are now telling us what the customers want and don't want and need and don't need. And we never had that before because we were an engineering-led organization. And so to your point there, when you bring engineers that close to the customer needs directly, they always engage. I've never been, I continue to be surprised at how they just really want to understand it. The questions flow and you can see the engineers are working out how they can solve this problem. And so our challenge is keeping our PMs away from the how, but keeping them more focused on the what and the why, and being able to relay that with passion and empathy to inspire the engineers to go and do great things and stop them. It's not a leash, that's the wrong term, but kind of pulling them back when they get too close is like, leave the room for the engineers to create great products. We'll do the job of kind of making sure the what and the why is well formed and they've got it and they understand the customers. They'll do great things because they're great engineers.
Absolutely. And I'm going to say this for the listeners out there that might have been going through something similar to you, and some listeners regular listeners might be familiar with this, but in a relatively immature product organization, I'm just based on what you said, maybe the word immature doesn't ring true with you, but maybe it does. There's always like two artifacts that are so important. One is a product management playbook. So it's essentially a run book of this is what we do, like we're outcomes. Like we don't write story points to the nth degree. We give you the whats and the whys. We never tell you the hows. Whatever. We data driven. Whatever the things that your team really stands for, that can be co-written. And I've seen loads and loads of organizations write this, and I've co-written this with lots. And it's great, but it tends to kind of go sit in the Confluence file, Notion file, depending what you're using, and it's there. But then I've worked with teams where I've implemented the next step, which to me is a product team success scorecard, which says, okay, we said this is what we're doing. Now, where are we on the journey? Let's give ourselves, even if we subjectively score ourselves or we try and make it as objectively a score, and give ourselves a rubric, a scoring mechanism, some numbers, some maths, and actually get ourselves there as a team. And it's not an evaluation. It's not like your quarterly or annual kind of job evaluation. It's where are we as a team? Where are we successful? And where do we need a lot of work to do? And it tends to be about four elements that are the inputs, because I always think about this and life as an algorithm. Like there's a whole bunch of inputs, right? And the inputs are kind of data, voice of the customer, prioritization, probably like your engineering / business partnership, and other organizations may have another couple. They probably don't have much less. I think that's kind of the core. And I think when you get your playbook or your run book and your product team success scorecard working together, and you start sharing it with your partners in engineering, on the C-suite and leadership, and they start seeing how the product team is getting more mature and how they're growing quarter by quarter by quarter, it's really amazing. Where I've seen the impact is people start moving away from delivery and start moving back towards voice of customer. How are we doing it? The empathy thing that you're talking about. Because if everything, when a lot of your peers in the C-suite, for example, don't get all those inputs into that algorithm, they'll just default back to delivery. And again, so much of that empathy just kind of goes out of that. So I know I've gone on a bit of a tirade there, but most of that was, John, I'm sure you've got and you do almost all of that. But, for a lot of the listeners out there that listen to Product Team Success and are in product leadership positions, I hope that there's a whole bunch there that they can take away from that. But John, does that gel with your kind of experience?
Yeah, something there you hit on that I think is really important. What we do as a leader is the old narrative of when I hate slide decks. I just generally do not like them at all. But it was like 101 presentation. Tell them what you're going to say what you're going to say, recap what you've just said to make sure the message gets through. So as leaders around improving product organizations, going into the field, for example, so we've got a call next week to highlight we've just implemented a new user feedback tool, which also allows us to collate some of the opportunity sizes with it so that we can do prioritization. So we said what we were going to do, we've rolled it out, we're getting the feedback, and now next week I'm going to go into the field team and say, here's how we use this to make better decisions. Here's how the work you're doing help products be better. To just cement in the maturity of the product team and the processes so that everyone can be reassured. And for me, it all comes down to taking noise out of the system. People need to be confident in their PM org is doing a good job for them so that they can go out and sell the right stuff. And when they bring the feedback back, they know how it's going to be handled. They know how it's going to be judged and balanced and prioritized. And so there's no noise. And people ask me, what do you mean by noise? Noise is the really odd behavior around the edge, which is, and I tell my team about transparency in PM also helps this. So a couple of examples. One, if field don't know how any of their feedback for a feature request from a really large customer is going to be handled, and you have no way to show them, it goes into a PM who black boxes it and then says yes or no. Which if they have an understanding of all the process, how you do it, what you level it up, what else is going on, here's all the other stuff we're doing, then it becomes self-apparent to them and they go, okay, that's fair enough. I see where that sits. I don't like it. Don't like that prioritization, but I get it. And they then you have a much better relationship, and that starts working better. On the other side, internally, I ask my PMs to be up to speed on what your other peers in other areas are doing. You don't need to know their roadmap or their features or their priorities as well as they do. But if someone comes to you randomly and asks about it, you should be able to relay with uniformity what's going on. And that's subtly really powerful, because if a person thinks that every PM is on the same page, understanding the same goals, delivering the same priorities, it just takes a load of noise. They don't need to go and ask 2 or 3 PMs. They'll be happy with the one PM they speak to, and they'll get the right answer. And so you get a massive efficiency of people just talking to the right people, everything just, there's no noise, people running around going, well, so-and-so said this, and I didn't think, it's subtle stuff. But at scale, you want a sales org and a customer success org that has trust in their PM org, and that requires a level of groundwork and grit and boring stuff of talking to people a lot to make sure that happens.
100%. I remember talking to a product manager fairly recently, probably a few months ago, and they were talking about, okay, great, they were on every sprint review and backlog rimming and all these things so that they could be available there for if the engineers ask them a question. So hang on a second. The engineers can ping you a question anytime. You need to be spending your time with the customers or customer success at the coalface doing the stuff that they can't do. Otherwise, you'll be in a sprint review, let's say, or a grooming, not a review, but like a planning session for like an hour or 2 hours. And out of those 2 hours, you probably might be, if your documentation's fine, you probably might be there for like 15 minutes if they run into hard things. But those 15 minutes could usually, almost always, be handled offline, right? Just in some commenting and asking. I love the fact that you also said, you don't like PowerPoint, but it was interesting in my time at Amazon. Amazon doesn't use PowerPoint at all, and everything is just documentation in Word. But it then created other problems, because people then just got into arguing. Well, and I remember being in discussions with like VPs and director levels at Amazon talking about, we have to have Oxford commas, like your 2 commas have to be here. And then it was like, and it has to be this length. And then it's like, it has to be X number of pages. If it's longer, we won't read it because, so all they did was take like, I think, not all they did. I think there's a lot of good stuff in documentation, writing better than PowerPoint, but it kind of transposed it from my PowerPoint presentations, skills are so good, to my active voice punctuation. Everything else is so good, and my length of my documents. So, John, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think it'll be great to have another conversation here. I feel like we could probably have spoken for another hour or two and spoken about these things. But, John, are you happy that if in the show notes, if people reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, perfectly happy. Look, I've come for a bumpy path. There's lessons there for everyone to learn from. So yeah, I'm happy to talk to anyone and everyone.
That's fantastic. And John, as our first aeronautical engineer, I really want to thank you for joining us today. I think you have so much that you can offer people in the product community. And thanks so much for giving back. And to all the listeners and viewers out there, thanks so much for joining me and John today on the Product Team Success Podcast, brought to you in partnership with Amplitude. Thanks for watching or listening. Bye for now.